and raucous crowd. Thank you. I cannot believe how many people are here this morning. Thank you so much. Let me thank Kathleen Murray and Nicole Shaguma and Conrad Taylor and my old friend Jim Hightower and Josh Fox. Thank you very much. You guys ready for a political revolution? You ready to transform America? Well, so are millions of other Americans. When we began this campaign about 11 months ago, we were 70 points behind Hillary Clinton. Turns out that the last few polls, we were winning national polls. Turns out that we have won 8 out of the last 9 caucuses and primaries. Turns out that if we have a large voter turnout a week from tomorrow, we're going to win here in New York State. And the reason that we are going to win, and the reason we've been doing so well all across this country, is we're doing something extremely radical. We're telling the American people the truth. The truth is not always pleasant. It's not always something that we want to hear. But it's necessary that we do hear it, or else we're not going to make the changes that we need. Truth number 1, we have a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining American democracy. This is a very big deal, because democracy means one person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. And when you have a handful of billionaire families like the Koch brothers and some others, when they are prepared to spend some $900 million in this election cycle to fund candidates who will represent the wealthy and the powerful, that is not democracy, that is oligarchy. And that is why, together, we are going to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. And furthermore, we've got Republican governors all over this country who are working overtime, not trying to bring more people into the political process, but trying to suppress the vote and making it harder for people to participate. So I say to those cowardly Republican governors, if you don't have the guts to participate in free, fair, and open elections, get out of politics and get another job. No more suppression of the vote in America. Our goal is, if you're 18 years of age and a citizen of this country, you have the right to vote. End of discussion. But it's not only a corrupt campaign finance system, it is a rigged economy. And it's important that everybody understand what is going on in our economy today. It's not something that the media focuses on a whole lot, but it's important that we understand it. Today in America, we have more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth, and it is worse today than at any time since 1928. Today in America, listen to this, the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1%, now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today in America, the 20 wealthiest people, 20 people, not a whole lot of people, own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans, half of our society. Today in America, one family, the Walton family, who own Walmart, one family owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. And when we talk about a rigged economy, it is not only massive levels of wealth inequality, it is the fact that the Walton family pays wages so low to its employees at Walmart that many of those workers are forced to go on food stamps and Medicaid. And do you know who pays higher taxes for those food stamps and Medicaid? Yeah, that's exactly right. The middle class does. So that is what a rigged economy is about, where the middle class of this country has to subsidize the wealthiest family in America because they refuse to pay their workers living wages. So I say to the Walton family, get off of welfare, start paying your workers a living wage. But it is not only wealth inequality, it is what's happening to income in America. And I say this to the young people here. Unless we turn around our economy, there is a strong possibility that your generation, for the first time in the modern history of this country, will have a lower standard of living than your parents. You all know what the American dream is about, and I'm a result, a product of that American dream. My father came to this country from Poland at the age of 17, didn't have a nickel in his pocket, couldn't speak English. He never made a whole lot of money, but he and my mom worked very hard to make sure that their two kids did better than they did. And that's the dream that millions and millions of people in this country have experienced. And I will be damned if we're going to see the American dream die. That is what the political revolution is about. It's about saying that when millions of people stand up and fight back, we can create a government that represents all of us, not just a handful of billionaire campaign contributors. Now, one of the most exciting aspects of this campaign, it's been very gratifying to me, is when we began this campaign, all of the pundits and the media, everyone was saying, well, young people, they're not really interested in politics. They're not interested in government. They're very busy with their video games or whatever else. But what we have seen throughout this campaign is young people understand the simple truth. You are the future of this country. And you have every right in the world to fight to make sure that that future works for you. And when we talk about the major issues facing our country, we also have to recognize that we have a broken criminal justice system. And what this campaign is largely about is asking you to think outside of the box, to think outside of the status quo, to understand that you have got to determine what the real problems facing this country, because the media is not going to do it for you. And here is a real problem that we have got to be very ashamed about, and we have to address. We have more people in jail than any other country on earth. China has a population about 4 times as large as we are. China is a communist authoritarian country that does not tolerate dissent terribly well, and yet we have more people in jail than China has. So this is an issue that we will address. And let me just point out some of the things that I think we have got to recognize. Number one, not talked about at all, and the point I'm going to make over and over again this morning, is many of the most important issues facing this country are not discussed by the media. Just because it's not on CNN or NBC does not make these issues real issues. And here's an example of that. Today in America, for kids, young people between the ages of 17 and 20 who graduated high school, not dropouts, graduated high school, if the kids are white, real unemployment and underemployment is 33%. Kids are Latino, 36%. Kids are African American, 51%. So here is a not so radical idea. We are going to invest in our young people, in jobs and education. We're going to invest in jobs and education, not jails and incarceration. I want this country to have the best educated people in the world, not more people in jail than anyone. And when we talk about criminal justice, I think you are tired and I am tired of seeing videos on TV of unarmed Americans, often African Americans, being killed by police officers. Now, I have been a mayor in Burlington, Vermont for 8 years. I've worked with police officers all of my life, and the vast majority of police officers are honest, hardworking, trying to do a very difficult job. But like any other public official, if a police officer breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. Furthermore, we must demilitarize local police departments. We must make local police departments reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. We must end private ownership of prisons and detention centers. We must rethink the so-called war on drugs. Over the last 30 years, millions of Americans have received police records for possession of marijuana. And if you are a young person going out looking for a job and you have a police record, that is not the easiest way to get that job. Right now, the Federal Controlled Substance Act lists marijuana as a Schedule I drug right alongside of heroin. Now, we can argue the pluses and minuses of marijuana, but nobody, no sane person thinks that marijuana is equivalent to heroin. That is why I have introduced legislation to take marijuana out of the federal control system. States will determine whether or not marijuana is legal in their states. We have 4 states that have already done that. But possession of marijuana should not be a federal crime. As some of you may know, I am running for the Democratic nomination to be president. In case you haven't heard, running against Secretary Hillary Clinton. I wanted to touch on some of the differences between Secretary Clinton and myself, which are very important differences. Number one, I believe that in this particular moment in history, this pivotal moment in history, we need leadership that is prepared to take on powerful special interests who dominate our economy and our political life. And you can tell a great deal about a candidate in terms of how he or she raises the money that one needs to run a presidential campaign. This is no small thing. This is no small thing. When we began our campaign, we had to make a decision as to whether or not we would establish a super PAC. Well, we thought about it for a tenth of a second, and we decided we would not establish a super PAC. very important issue. And it's important because what we decided that we would do is not ask Wall Street or the drug companies or the billionaires for their money, because we did not want to be dependent on Wall Street, the drug company, or billionaires as we went forward. So what we did instead is something pretty unusual. We went out to the American people, the middle class and working families, and we said, look, if you want to support a campaign that is prepared to take on the billionaire class, we need your help. And what happened has blown me away completely. It's something I never would have believed to be possible. Since this campaign has begun, we have received over 6 million individual campaign contributions. 6 million contributions from 2 million people, unprecedented in the history of the United States of America. Anyone know what the average contribution is? And that is exactly what the political revolution is about. We can run a winning national campaign without being dependent on the big money interests. Secretary Clinton has chosen another path in terms of raising money. She has several super PACs. The largest PAC in the last filing report indicated that they had raised $25 million from special interests, $15 million from Wall Street. And as many of you know, Secretary Clinton has given speeches behind closed doors for large Wall Street financial institutions for a tidy $250,000 a speech. Now, what I kind of think, if you're going to get $250,000 for a speech, it must be an extraordinarily brilliant speech. It must be a speech for $250,000 will probably solve all of the problems facing the world. Probably a speech written in Shakespearean prose. So I would hope that Secretary Clinton would share that brilliant speech with all of us and release the transcripts. Secretary Clinton says, well, she is prepared to release the transcripts if other people do the same. Well, let me announce this morning, I am prepared. I am prepared to release all of the transcripts for all of the speeches that I've given to Wall Street. Not very hard. No speeches, no transcripts. Let me touch on another area where Secretary Clinton and I have some strong differences of opinion. That is dealing with what is certainly one of the major crises facing not only our nation, but the entire world, and that is climate change and the environment. When the Keystone Pipeline was announced, it was not very difficult for me. It was not very difficult for me to. It was not very difficult for me to make it clear that I would vote against the Keystone Pipeline. This was kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of a no-brainer because it makes no sense to be excavating and transporting some of the dirtiest fuel on the planet. Well, it took Secretary Clinton a while, but she did finally evolve on that issue. But evolving is not good enough. We need leadership in opposition to this pipeline. If we are serious about dealing with climate change, we need to understand that we need bold action now to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainability. Together, we are going to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. And what the scientists are telling us is not just that climate change is real, caused by human activity, and already causing devastating problems. What they are telling us is if we do not get our act together boldly and in the next few years, a bad situation will become much worse. And that means more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more rising sea levels, more acidification of the ocean, and it also means more international conflict as people fight over limited natural resources. In other words, if we are going to leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable for our children and future generations, we need bold action now. And that is why I have introduced the most comprehensive climate change legislation in the history of the U.S. Senate. Which, among other things, calls for a tax on carbon. That is my view. That is not Secretary Clinton's view. I have consistently opposed offshore drilling in the Arctic, in the Gulf, and in the Atlantic. Secretary Clinton has not. I led the opposition to fast-tracking the disastrous Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is opposed by major environmental groups like the Sierra Club and 350.org. Hillary Clinton did not lead the opposition. She came on board at the very end of the process. I would end the fossil fuel extraction on public lands. Hillary Clinton would not. And let me now take a moment to talk about an issue that I know that is very, very important to the people in the Binghamton area. And that is, I want to applaud you for standing up to Governor Cuomo and demanding that New York State ban fracking. Is prove to the world that when people stand up and form a grassroots movement of environmentalists, public health advocates, farmers, working families, and religious leaders, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. What may have been considered unrealistic or pie in the sky just a few years ago has now been achieved in New York because you made it happen. And that is how real change always occurs, when people stand up and fight back. In 2012, I was very proud that my state of Vermont became the first state in the nation to ban fracking. Last year, Maryland imposed a moratorium on fracking until 2017, and cities and towns across the nation are doing the same. Progress is being made, but much more needs to be done. I don't have to explain to anyone here that the growing body of evidence tells us that fracking is a danger to our water supply, our most precious resource. It is a danger to the air we breathe and can cause lung cancer. It has resulted in more earthquakes. It is highly explosive, and it is contributing to climate change. And on this issue of fracking, Secretary Clinton and I have some very strong differences of opinion. In my view, if we are serious about safe and clean drinking water, if we are serious about clean air, if we are serious about protecting the health of our children and our families, if we are serious about combating climate change, we need to put an end to fracking, not only in New York and Vermont, but all over this country. The toxic chemicals used in fracking are known to cause cancer and birth defects. Both the EPA and the National Academy of Sciences have shown clear evidence that hydraulic fracturing can lead to a contaminated water supply. We cannot, we must not allow our children to be poisoned by toxic drinking water just so that a handful of fossil fuel companies can make even more profits. There is simply no good way to contain the cocktail of toxic chemicals pumped into the ground. The threat it poses to our families is too great. Moreover, the threat of methane emissions from fracking presents a profound danger to our climate. Methane traps more than 84 times the heat of carbon dioxide. While natural gas may burn cleaner than coal, the enormous explosion of fracking and the resulting release of methane presents a significant danger to our planet. Secretary Clinton's role in fracking when she was Secretary of State is not a good record. Secretary Clinton and her State Department worked to export fracking throughout the world to reward companies like Chevron, Halliburton, ExxonMobil, and ConocoPhillips. In my view, that is unacceptable. Bottom line is, if we are serious about addressing the crisis of climate change, if we are serious about addressing the crisis of clean water, which is going to be a greater and greater crisis in years to come, we need bold action, we need bold leadership. The differences that I have with Secretary Clinton, not just environmental issues, not just campaign finance issues, dealing with trade. Now, trade is not a sexy issue. Media doesn't cover it very much. But here's the truth. We have lost millions of decent-paying jobs over the last number of decades because large multinational corporations have shut down in America, moved to China or Mexico, hired people for pennies an hour, and then brought their products back into this country. And I say to those multinational corporations, if you want us to buy your products, you damn well have to start investing in America, not just in China. All of you know that one of the most important jobs of a president is foreign policy. And foreign policy judgment is of enormous consequence. In 2002, the most important foreign policy debate in the modern history of America took place about Iraq. I listened very carefully to what President Bush and Cheney and Don Rumsfeld and all those guys had to say about Iraq. I listened carefully. I didn't believe them. I helped lead the opposition to the war. As most of you know, Secretary Clinton voted for that disastrous war. This campaign listens to ordinary Americans and not just billionaire campaign contributors. We are listening to working people who tell me, Bernie, we can't make it a $9 or $10 an hour. We have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And change takes place not only when you and others in New York State demanded an end to fracking. Real change takes place when workers all across this country in the fast food industry went out on strike and told the world they cannot make it on $7.25 an hour. They stood up and they fought back. And then in Seattle, Washington, $15 an hour was passed. Los Angeles, San Francisco, food workers in Washington, D.C. This campaign is listening to senior citizens and disabled veterans. And they are telling me they cannot make it on $11,000 or $12,000 a year Social Security. Nobody can make it on $11,000 or $12,000 a year. Despite that reality, many of my Republican colleagues in the Senate, if you can believe it, want to cut Social Security benefits. Well, I've got some bad news for them. We're not going to cut Social Security benefits. We're going to expand Social Security. This campaign is listening to women. And what women are telling me is they are tired of making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. They want the whole damn dollar, and they're right. That every man in this arena will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. And this campaign is listening to young people. And what young people are telling me is, how does it happen that when they do what their parents said to do, what their teachers said to do, every dropped out of school after 2 years, $60,000 in debt. Spoke to a man in Nevada, guy is 55 years of age. He has been paying off his student debt for 25 years, is more in debt today than when he took the debt out, took the loan out 25 years ago. We should be rewarding people for getting an education, not punishing them. Education and learning is inherent in who we are as human beings, and in a very competitive global economy, we need the best educated workforce in the world. That's just a fact. Now, when we think outside of the box and outside of the status quo, just think about this. 50, 100 years ago, very brave people said, you know what, all kids in this country, low-income, working-class kids, deserve a free public education from the first grade to the 12th grade. That was a pretty revolutionary act. But, as all of you know, the world, our economy, technology has changed in significant ways in the last several decades. Truth is, people simply need more education today than they used to. That's just a fact. So in my view, when we understand that in many respects, a college degree today is the equivalent of what a high school degree was 50 years ago, we have got to extend the concept of public education and make public colleges and universities tuition free. Now, some people think that's a radical idea. It is not a radical idea. There is no question in my mind that we will make public colleges and universities tuition-free. The question is whether we do it sooner or later. Let's do it sooner. You know, Germany does it today. Scandinavia does it today. And here's something that many people don't know, is that 50 years ago, in the United States of America, some of our great public colleges and universities were virtually tuition-free. If we could do that 50 years ago, we damn well can do that today. And then people say, well, Bernie, you know, you're Santa Claus, you're a great guy, you're giving out all this stuff. Free tuition in public colleges and universities, and by the way, lowering the burden of student debt. My legislation would allow people to refinance their debt at the lowest interest rates they can find. Well, then people say, well, that's great, you know, really nice, you're a great guy, how are you going to pay for that? And again, this is thinking outside of the box. Some of you will remember that 8 years ago, as a result of the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street, this country was plunged into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And having destroyed much of the economy, with them, I agree. We have inner cities where unemployment is sky high, access to health care is extremely low, where we have schools that are failing our young people, where we have apartments where people cannot find affordable rent. We need to pay attention and rebuild inner cities in America. This campaign is listening to a group of people who get very little attention, and that is our Native American community. All of you know that from before we were a country, when the first settlers came to this continent, Native American people were lied to, they were cheated, and many of the treaties negotiated were abrogated. All of you know also that we have received as part of our culture some extraordinary gifts from the Native American people. Among many other things, they have taught us that we are part of nature. That we have got to live with nature, not destroy nature. The truth is that the Native American people today in many parts of this country are hurting. Their unemployment rates very high, drug abuse rates suicide among young people, disgracefully high, painfully high. We have got to change our relationship to the Native American community, and if elected president, I will do that. Let me repeat what I've said on many occasions and have been criticized for saying. So I want there to be no ambiguity, no confusion, so I will say it again. I believe that health care is a right of all people. The Affordable Care Act, and I'm on the committee that helped write that bill, has done some very important things. We've eliminated this obscenity called pre-existing conditions. We have increased the number of people who have insurance by 17 million. And we have done away with discrimination against women who are paying higher health care costs than they should have. But despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, 29 million Americans today have no health insurance, and many of you are underinsured with high deductibles and high copays. Is that right? And every single day, all of us are getting ripped off by the greed of the drug companies who charge us the highest prices in the world. And then on top of all of that, we end up spending far more per capita on health care than do the people of other nations. We spend almost 3 times what the British do, 50% more than the French, and a lot more than the Canadians. And that is why I believe that in America we've got to join every other major country on earth and pass a Medicare for all single-payer program. All of you know that real change never takes place from the top on down, always takes place from the bottom on up. And you are a living example of what I mean. You made the governor sign a bill establishing $15 an hour minimum wage. You made the governor sign a bill ending fracking in New York State. That didn't happen because the governor woke up one day and said, oh, that's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? You know, I think this fracking is really dangerous. I'm going to sign it. Or you know, we've got to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. That is not how it happened. He did it because he's a good politician, and that's fair enough. And he responded to the needs of the people who stood up and demanded that. And that is how change always comes about. 100+ years ago, when workers were being exploited, when they're working 7 days a week, when they were working 15 hours a day, they stood up. And they said, we're not beasts of burden, we're not animals, we want dignity on the job. And they formed trade unions to protect their workers. For hundreds of years, African Americans and their allies stood up, fought back. We don't know how many died in that struggle, how many went to jail in that struggle, how many were beaten in that struggle. But the American people said that racism and segregation and bigotry will not be what this country is about. Now, we have forgotten this, many people have forgotten this, but 100 years ago in America, women did not have the right to vote, did not have the right to go to the schools they wanted, or do the work they wanted. 100 years ago, no time at all from an historical perspective. But women stood up and their male allies stood with them and said that in America, women will not be second-class citizens. Let me tell you how change takes place in more recent history, not just the minimum wage fight. If we were here 6, 7 years ago, no time at all, somebody jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, I think that gay marriage will be made legal in 50 states in this country. The person next to him would have likely jumped up and said, you know, you're crazy. That can't happen. It happened because the gay community and their straight allies fought back against horrendous bigotry and hatred, but they prevailed by making it clear to the American people that in our country, human beings have the right to love whomever they want, regardless of their gender. That's how change takes place. And now, at this moment in American history, there is something, I believe, extraordinary happening from coast to coast. And that is that people are looking at the status quo. And they're saying, you know what? This status quo is not working for us. It's wrong. We've got to change it. They're looking around them and they say, why do we have such a grotesque level of income and wealth inequality? That's not acceptable. Why do we have a situation where people are working longer hours for low wages? Almost all new income is going to the top 1%. Not acceptable. Why are we the only major country on earth not to provide paid family and medical leave to our families? Why are we the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care for all as a right? Why do we, at a time when we're seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, why do we continue having the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth? Why do we have hundreds of thousands of bright, qualified young people not able to afford to go to college, and millions others leaving college deeply in debt? People all over this country looking around them and say, this status quo is not working. We need real change. What this campaign is about. A week from Tuesday, on the 19th, there will be a very, very important primary here in New York State. And what I have learned throughout this campaign is when there is a large voter turnout, we win. When there's a low voter turnout, we lose. So my request to all of you is not only come out and vote, bring your friends and your family and your co-workers. And if we can win here in New York State, I believe we are on our way to the White House. Thank you all.